Welcome to today's video where I'm going to be talking about Single Eyeshadows from Oden side. They did launch these a few weeks ago and there are 42 new shades, 12 of which of those are multi-chromes, and I'm actually going to be doing it a little bit differently today and I'm going to be live swatching all of them. So I'll be talking through how they feel and also the colors and how they look. Are they sheer? Are they more opaque? And then I'll be showing you 3 looks and then I'll give you some of my thoughts at the end of the video. And I did receive these in PR from Oden side, so thank you so much to Oden side for sending these over to me. So let's get right into it. So I'm going to be starting out with the multi-chromes and I'm going to be kind of putting them by color. I'm going to be doing 4 at a time. So here's No, N-O-E. And this one is definitely on the sheer side. You can kind of see. I think you could layer it a little bit more, especially if you were to use a glitter primer of some sort or some sort of a tacky primer. But this one is really smooth and does not feel squishy in the pan. Next up is Isabella, also a little bit on the sheer side, really smooth. And this one feels maybe just the tiniest, like a little bit squishy, but like not really. And I did wear this one and this one wore beautifully on me. I had just like the tiniest amount of creasing on one eye, but that doesn't really bother me because I don't expect anything to last on my lids anymore anyways. So on to the next shade. This is Maya, and this one is also a little bit more topper-like, but I think you could definitely build it up and get it to be more opaque if you used a tacky primer. And then Eden, and this one is probably the most opaque out of all of these, besides this shade, which I forgot the name. There's a lot of names to remember here. So this one has a very strong pink base to it. This whole time I thought I was filming, so let's go through these. Unfortunately, they're already on my arm, but first up was the Lola, which is an iridescent multi-chrome. And this one feels nice and smooth, maybe just a little bit oily. And then the next shade next to that is Ingrid, which this one feels squishy and it feels oily. And I definitely know that this will not work for me and this will crease on me, even especially actually with a wet primer, because if this already has its own oily wet formula and you put it on top of another formula, they're just not going to mesh well. At least that's been my experience. And then next to that is Judy, which this one is really nice and smooth and very opaque, and this one does not feel squishy. And then the next shade next to that is Angela, and this shade is basically just jelly. I don't know if all the Angela shades are like this or if this is an inconsistency of formula kind of problem where they're not checking the batches, but this is completely unusable for me. It creased pretty much immediately, and I tried to do the trick that Marta mentioned, which was to use a paper towel and press it down onto the shadow to try to suck up some of the oiliness, and even with that, it's still pretty squishy and you can kind of see in the pan. And its swatch is really sheer and it's extremely underwhelming. It doesn't really have much shine. It's more of like a satin, especially compared to this shade right here. I believe that was Lola. So this shade is a dud for me. And then unfortunately, this one is also a dud. I just know I won't be able to use it on my lid unless I wait like, 6 months to a year to see if it dries out a little bit so that I can use it. Onto the last 4 shades. These are basically black-based multi-chromes. They're much more jeweled. They're not sheer. They're not really layerable. They just have a almost black base to them. So first up is Marius. And these are definitely very smooth, but they're not very shiny, especially compared to like what you're used to seeing from Clionadh, Terra Moons, etc. And there's just so many black-based multi-chromes like these, especially these kinds of shades, already on the market. And let's be honest, you probably already have these shades. Next up is Thor. And you can kind of see like it looks great when it's on the finger, but then once you're swatching it, you can really see the black base. And it's just not really that shiny. And even with a tacky primer, it doesn't really amp it up that much. I did use one of these shades, I forget which one, on the lid just to see what it looks like on the lid, because this happens a lot with these black-based multi-chromes is they look really beautiful and metallic on the finger, but once you actually apply it to the lid, they do dull out a little bit. Next up is Dimitri. This one's kind of swatching a little sheer. Sorry, my hand keeps going out of frame. I'm trying to hold it up. Wish I had like an armrest for swatching or something. Someone should create that and sell it on Etsy. This one looks actually not that shiny still. Maybe I thought it looks a little bit shinier than the shade next to it, but. And then last up is the shade Leon, and I feel like this shade is just, this is not a multi-chrome. It is absolutely a stunning shade, yes, but there's no shift. I think it's just because it has a black base to it, and it's red, but it does not shift, and to me, that is not a multi-chrome, and this one feels a little bit squishy. So far, all these feel like regular, dry type of multi-chrome formulas, and then this one feels just a little bit waxy. It's not squishing in the pan, but it does feel waxy, and I'm just adding another layer here, so you can really see the edges are definitely on the darker side. So yeah, I mean, let me know if you can see a shift in Leon, but I'm not really sure why it's advertised as a multi-chrome because I don't see it. And even on this shade, the shift is not very strong compared to like other brands. I would just go with other brands, honestly. You can't really go wrong with Devinah, Clionadh, Shine by SD. All those brands have really beautiful, reliable multi-chrome formulas. Next, onto the non-multi-chrome shades, and I'm again pairing these together based on color. So first up is Emma, and this is super, super sheer. It's almost more like an iridescent type of shadow, even though it does not look like it is an iridescent shadow, like compared to something like this shade, for example. This is Ella. Like, see how you could see that this is iridescent, but that one actually looks quite purple. But it's just got a little hint of color. And that one is very smooth, but this one is very smooth, but it's hard panning on me from swatching it. Next up is Emily, and this one feels just like a regular shimmer formula. Doesn't feel squishy or waxy or anything like that. And here it is built up, so you can build it up quite a bit. But it is pretty opaque already in itself. And those two are pretty smooth in the pan, but this one right here, which is Ava, this one you can see is a bit more textured in the pan. And so I think that's going to be more like a topper, yes. Usually these kinds of shadows are more topper-like, so we'll see if that's true for all of these that are a little bit more textured. I mean, they're textured in the pan, but they apply nice and smooth. And they do tend to be more sparkly versus like a nice, just like a regular kind of shine, like this shadow, which is really smooth. And then Stella, which is also more like smooth, like this one, not really sparkly, but still metallic and shiny. It looks like it has some flex throughout it. And this one feels a little waxy. It actually doesn't feel like oily, it feels waxy. So here's the purples from the collection. Next up we have the peachy pinks. This is Olivia. A little bit more on the sheer side. This is a really beautiful shade. This one feels just slightly waxy in the pan, but it is layering and it looks beautiful. It has quite a bit of a yellow base to it. I'm not sure if it's translating on camera, but to me I can really see it, especially from my angle, which is this angle right here. Next up is Charlotte. This one is so sparkly. It has a really beautiful like orangey base to it, reddish orangey base, but it's got these gold flecks throughout it. It is so, so sparkly. I think so far this is probably the most sparkly one that I've swatched. Next up we have Mia, and this one is just like a regular shimmer shadow, very smooth. Looks like it has a little bit of a duochrome to it. I can see a little bit of blue almost flashing towards me. It's like silvery bluish on top of the peach. And then last up is Ivy, also very smooth, reliable. These both feel like regular shimmers, maybe just slightly on the waxy side, but I think these are going to wear really nicely. I don't think I'll run into any issues with these. Next, onto the yellow, gold, oranges. This is Ella, which is a iridescent gold flashing white-based kind of shimmer shadow. This one feels nice and smooth, no stickiness, no squishiness. Next up is Samantha, and this one feels pretty waxy. I feel you can kind of see the way it's spreading as well, which makes it like you can really make it opaque. But this I think might crease on me if I put on too much. I'll have to be very light-handed. I actually might have worn the shade. I honestly don't remember. It was a couple weeks ago, but this one is very, very sparkly. Super sparkly, and you can see the difference between these two shades in the pan. See if I can hold them next to each other so you can see this one is a bit more textured, which means that it's probably going to have more sparkle, which it does. And then this one is on the smoother side. So it doesn't feel wet. It just feels like waxy, like it feels a little thicker, if you know what I mean. Next up is Victoria. This one feels nice and smooth. And no stickiness, no squishiness. Really beautiful shadow. You probably already have something like this. Next up is Lucy. The shade looks pretty satin-like. It is very opaque though, but it's quite a bit of a satin. This one feels just like a tiny bit waxy, but like in a different way than this one felt. It's a little harder to spread out because of that. And last up is Laura. This one feels a little bit waxy as well, but I don't see having an issue with it unless I put on too much. And maybe even then. So here's the golds, yellows, oranges. I think this next shade could have probably gone with the other set, but I thought it was a little bit more on the taupey side. This is Nora. It is very, very sparkly. It feels very waxy and a little bit on the sticky side as well. This one I might have issues with. Definitely would have to go with a super light hand. Maybe even try the Fahrenheit Pixie Epoxy just to like really make sure. Next up is James. This one, you can see it's very opaque. I feel like this one you can get a little sheer if you wanted to just like use your finger. That way you can kind of just like tap on the sparkles versus get like a full coating. This one also can come on a little thick, so I would go in with a lighter hand with this one. Feels a tiny bit waxy, but not as waxy as this one. Next up is Chloe. This one is more of a iridescent or like lighter based shadow. It has a bunch of flecks throughout it. I can't even, it's like, it's got like a taupey purple base, but then there's blue flecks and silver flecks throughout it. It's really, really stunning. And this one feels like a regular shadow, doesn't feel waxy or anything. At least mine doesn't. Again, I'm not sure if the inconsistency is purposeful or if it's like a mistake and if only like all the Ingrid shades are that word squishy formula, or if it's kind of like sometimes it's Ingrid and sometimes it's Chloe or something like that. You know, I have no idea. So let me know in the comments below if you have experience with some of these shadows and you feel like they're actually, you have some that are squishy that I didn't have that are squishy. Next up is Robert. Super sparkly again. It feels just tiny bit waxy, but this one is so, so beautiful. I do feel like this one might be a little bit more on the unique side in terms of just like a non-multi-chrome shimmer shadow. Last up is Luke, and you'll see this one is just like almost a satin compared to the rest of these super sparkly shadows, which is nothing wrong with that, but not my personal preference. I would not be reaching for this shade, to be honest, but also because it is on the darker side. It has quite a bit of a orangey reddish brown base and some purple kind of flecks on top. Honestly, not really my favorite, not like my personal preference in terms of shadows I would wear. The shadow probably should have been with the other set, the kind of like taupey shades. This is Samuel, and this is just like a stunning silver. I mean, look at that. It looks like I literally just like painted liquid silver foil on my wrist right here. And this one feels nice and smooth. Maybe just a little bit on the thicker side, but not necessarily waxy. Next up is Jacob, so we're going to be doing the blues. This one is a stunning aqua, and love the shade. Feels nice and smooth, not squishy, not waxy. Next up is Nicolas, I believe, because it has a K instead of a C, like in English. I think that's how it's pronounced, but feel free to correct me in the comments. This one feels a little bit thick. Maybe a little bit oily, but not squishy. And that one is so beautiful. Next up is Daniel. And this one's not really swatching that well. I feel like this one you could kind of sheer out if you wanted to. I feel like the way it's swatching, I can still kind of see my skin tone through it. So I'm just going to put on another layer. But this one definitely I see as an option to kind of sheer out. Very beautiful, but do you need both of these? I mean, once you swatch them out, I would actually prefer this one, I think. I think it's sparklier, and I think that the sheen of the blue, it's like a really beautiful, almost cobalt blue. It's so vibrant. It's almost neon. Next up is David. This one feels very thick and waxy. I feel like you can kind of see the way it's, I think you can kind of see the way it's like been spreading out. It just feels a little bit on the thicker side, but not squishy. And this is just a really beautiful denim shimmery blue. And then last up is Anthony. This one looks like it's got like a grayish base to it with a teal kind of sparkle over that. And this one I think you could also have a little sheer, but it can kind of build up a little bit. But I can definitely see the base a lot from this angle. And look how stained my fingers are from these blues. Anyways, these are the blues and the silver. Last up we have the greens. You can see this blue stained a little bit. Try to get it off the best I could. So we have Kevin. Oh, it's so beautiful. It's got a very beautiful lime green base with a blue sheen over it. It is so stunning. This one feels maybe a little bit on the waxy side, just a little bit on the thicker side. And it is textured in the pan, which means you might be able to shear it out compared to the next shade, which is Justin. You can see this one looks much smoother. So here is Justin. I feel like you can see the difference, like this shine compared to this one. I mean, they're both beautiful. Again, I'm not saying that they're not beautiful, but this is my preference. This is like a nice, just reliable shimmer. Feels a little bit thick, but... And then here is Gabriel. This one is a beautiful, beautiful tone. Such a nice, like, mossy green shimmer shadow. I'm actually not really sure if I have anything too similar to this one. It has a pretty unique tone to it. Next up is John. This one I think you could shear out. And this one is a little bit more textured in the pan. And it does have a bit of a waxy texture to it. So I think the key here is to not put on too much. But that one is so vibrant and so beautiful. Then we have Christopher. Also a little bit on the texture side in the pan and a little bit waxy. So just a little bit like thicker kind of formula. It doesn't feel like as smooth as this one. Like it's still smooth, but it just feels like there's like an extra little like tug on it. Especially when you're swatching, it just tugs on your skin a little bit. And then last but not least, out of 42 shadows, we have Noah. And this one, super sparkly, really beautiful, a little bit waxy, but does not look too textured in the pan. And here's like a second layer of that one. Really just takes a little bit of back and forth to really spread it. So here's the last bunch of shadows. For the first look, I'm going to be dipping into the Dollhouse palette from Blend Bunny, and I'm going to be using this column right here with these kind of mauve tones, and I'm going to be pairing it with the shade Thor. I really wanted to see one of these black-based multichromes in action, just to see how it will look on the lid, because a lot of times with these kinds of multichromes, they can be extremely shiny in the pan and also swatch really shiny, but then once you put them on the lid, they do dull out just a little bit. So I'm curious because I feel like these are not the most impactful black-based multichromes I have ever swatched, so I thought it would be a good one to try out on the lid. I unfortunately obviously cannot possibly use 42 shadows. I do 42 looks, so I'm really trying to be strategic in which shades I do show. I didn't want to mention, I actually already filmed 2 looks, however, the footage got deleted. By that I mean I somehow accidentally deleted it, but I do remember that I used the shade Angela in one of the previous looks, and what you're seeing is basically me repressing it in because it was so squishy. I actually took a napkin and I pressed down a bunch of times to try to get some of the oil or liquid out of it. And for me and my lids personally, it is just unusable. It is completely wet, and even you could see it doesn't really pick up even though it's so wet, but maybe you could kind of see as I'm squishing it just how much it squishes. It'd be great if it was in focus, but it's like sticky almost too. Like I could feel it being a little sticky. There's a little bit of tack to it, so it just like really moves around in the pan a lot, and this is just unusable for me. I absolutely cannot put this on my lid. It will completely crease within probably 3 minutes. So I'm going in with rouge right into my crease, and I'm going to take a little bit of baby doll on the edge of that. I'm going to take it out here as well, just a little bit, and then taking Plume on the outer corner, just laying it down first, kind of tapping it on, and then I'm going to slowly start to blend it out. Wiped off my brush a little bit. I'm going to take it underneath my lower lash line, just about like a third way in, really, not too far. Taking a nice clean brush with some setting powder and just going over the edges with that, really making sure it's nice and blended out. Putting down some Fairly Pixie epoxy, but not a lot, just really small amount, just enough to help it stick down. Refer 28 brush and Thor. Just gonna pop that on, dipping back in for a bit more. And yeah, I feel like it's really not that shiny. It's definitely a little bit metallic, but not a lot. So what I also like to do is use my finger, because sometimes I feel like the finger for some reason is able to kind of maintain the metallicness. That's totally not a word, just making that up. And I definitely think that helped quite a bit. But that being said, I'm a bit underwhelmed for kind of $15 here. It's not the greatest. Did have a little bit of fallout, which I'm actually a little surprised, because I thought it was pretty smooth of a shadow. And then I'm just gonna go back and blend out this edge a little bit further out here and kind of feather the edges of that. But I don't know, I'm not like too impressed. I definitely have way shinier, similar shadows than this. Here's the first finished look. For this look, I'm going to go a little bit more colorful, and I'm going to dip into the Primal palette from Blend Bunny Cosmetics. Taking the Refer 14 brush and going in with a ray on the inner crease. And I'm going to take Untamed on the center, oh my goodness, on the center of my crease. I forgot how pigmented that shade is. And then next to that, taking Warning. That sounded really funny, actually. And just kind of blending it into Untamed. And then I'm going to wipe off my brush and just take a little bit more Untamed. Really want to make sure I blend it up here and into the yellow. Picking up Lethal and putting it on the outer corner. Just kind of tapping it on first, laying it down, wiping off my brush, and going back in to really feather it out. I'm just going to take a little bit more. Tapping it on. I'm taking it underneath my lower lash line as well, just only taking it about like a third way in. And I'm actually going to pick up a little bit of Warning and just use it to blend out Lethal just a bit more on the outer corner here. Taking a clean, fluffy brush with some setting powder on it and just going over the edges. Just kind of taking it all over. Getting a little harsh here. Putting down some Fairly Pixie epoxy. Picking up Maya with the Refer 28 brush. Oh, this is such a beautiful shade. Oh, that is so pretty. It's so vibrantly orange. It's really predominantly orange. I don't really see the yellow as much once I put it down. Maybe if I layered it more over a yellow. And then I'm taking Eden on the same brush on the other side of it. And it's going to go all over my lid below Maya. Into the outer corner a little bit as well. I feel like these two look a little bit similar on the lid, but I can tell that they're different, but they do kind of complement each other. Here's the second finished look. So for the third look, I'm going to go in with the Red Dragon palette for the mattes. Going in with Sunrise right into the crease. Their mattes are always so nice. I really wish they had launched mattes as well and not just shimmers, because I feel like their mattes are really nice. Like definitely the standout. Next I'm going into Claw onto the outer corner, and I'm going to bring it up into a crease just a little bit. And just keep blending out basically in a triangular shape out here in the outer corner. And then I'm going to connect that shadow as well underneath my lower lash line just a little bit. And then I'm going to use this brush to just clean it up on the edge. And then actually I'm going to go in with a little bit of Sunrise on the edge of that as well to bring it down here. I think that's pretty good. I'm going to wipe off the blending brush I used. I feel like it's getting a little bit blown out, more than I wanted it to be, but that's okay. So we've got the outer corner. I'm going to go in just with a tiny bit more out here to deepen it up even further. Just to build it up more. And for the shimmers, I'm actually not going to be using a sticky primer. I'm just going to use my fingers. So I'm going to be going in with Nora, which is this beautiful, more neutral leaning shade. This is what it looks like swatch. I mean, just look at that. And that I'm going to go and put over the center of my lid essentially, and you can kind of see it's a little bit translucent, and that is something I definitely noticed, is if you don't use something tacky underneath and you just use your finger, you can kind of get like a nice just wash. And I just went in with a little bit more, so it's getting a little bit more opaque now. Super sparkly for sure. I'm gonna go and blend this out here a little bit, and then on the inner portion I'm going in with Ella, which is essentially like a gold iridescent kind of shadow. It doesn't seem to have a shift, I don't think. And that's just gonna go right above it. And I feel like, I mean, I can see that it's definitely gold. But again, it's looking a little bit sheer. I'm gonna add a little bit more. Just not afraid to get a little messy. And then I'm gonna put that on my inner corner highlight. And here's the finished look. None of these are multi-chromes. These are just like the regular shimmer shadows with no shifts. Now there's 42 shadows, so I haven't tried all 42 shadows, but I've tried almost 10 out of the 42, and I've wear tested for about 8 hours, and I will talk about that in a little bit. But first let me talk about the multi-chromes. I feel like they're overall a little bit underwhelming. There's a couple of shades that are a little bit more stand out, but specifically the black based multi-chromes in here are just really almost satin-like. They don't have a lot of shine compared to some other brands, and honestly you probably already have most of these multi-chrome shades, especially if you buy from a lot of indie brands, you buy a lot of Single Eyeshadows. I do understand that this might be a good option for anyone who is not USA based, as the indie brand choices are smaller outside of the US and shipping is expensive for these US brands, but I would honestly recommend checking out Leigh Cosmetics, Glam Shop, Burnimage, Karla Cosmetics in terms of just overall Single Eyeshadows and multi-chromes. To me, there seems to be an inconsistency in formula. I'm not sure if there's a lack of quality checking and if the inconsistency is consistent in the shades. So for example, as you saw, Angela was a shade that was really squishy for me. I don't know if that means that all Angela shades in that batch or in general are squishy, or if there could be like random other eyeshadows that might be squishy. And when I say formula inconsistency, I'm not talking about the smoothness or the sparkliness. I'm talking about how they feel to the touch in terms of oiliness and thickness, which is something I talked about. There are definitely two shades that are complete duds for me that I can't use because they're way too wet, oily, as squishy, and they will just immediately crease on me, which is very unfortunate. I would say that the majority of the shadows are normal, or like a more normal formula. Some of them are a little bit waxier, a little bit thicker. So now let's talk about wear time. I wore 4 shades individually with and without Pixie Epoxy. So I would put Fairy Pixie Epoxy on one eye and at the other, and I would wear these shadows for about 8 hours. And just keep in mind that I do live in a cold climate right now. It is winter time, so that could definitely affect it, because I think the wear time in general might be different in the summer and if I'm outside in the sun and sweating, etc. I do have oily hooded lids and pretty much everything creases on me at this point, and I don't really have a problem with that as long as I can tap it out throughout the day and the shadows don't disintegrate on me. And what I mean is there's sometimes a shadow will crease, but it will also like start disappearing on my lid to the point where there's like almost no shadow left, and then that's an issue. So during these wear times, I did experience a very small amount of creasing on the eye that didn't have the Fairy Pixie Epoxy, but it was not fixable. So for me, it really isn't an issue. But remember that everyone's skin and experiences with especially makeup products are different. So what might crease on me might not crease on you, and vice versa. For the most part, if you have deep set eyes, you'll probably not experience any sort of issues. That being said, if you have oily skin and or hooded eyes, I would probably recommend only getting some of the smoother shades from this collection, or maybe even skipping the singles from this collection. And especially if you're US based, I would just order multi-chromes from some of the really well-known indie brands that are really reliable: Terra, Clionadh, Devinah, Shine by SD, and Touch of Glam Beauty, just to name a few. Some of the shadows that stand out to me are Eden, Maya, Leon, Charlotte, Chloe, Olivia, Kevin, Daniel, and Robert. Almost forgot to mention they do sell empty palettes like this, which fit 12 of the multi-chromes. Personally, I don't really like this. It's a little bit thick and just a little bit chunky. I prefer my empty palettes to be just a little bit slimmer. Also, something about this like washed out pink reminds me of just like Barbie doll houses, and like in general Barbie doll kind of like toys from like the early 2000s. It's just something about it. I wish that they had made like a palette that would fit 9 pans, and then maybe a palette that would fit even more than 12 pans. And they also have these compacts for 1 eyeshadow, which I think was a good idea, but personally I will not be storing mine like this. I do love that this one is clear, because then you'll be able to see what kind of shadow you put in here. So those are my thoughts at the Oden's Eye Single Eyeshadows. I do hope that they launch some matte single eyeshadows, which I don't see why they wouldn't, so that way you can really create a curated custom eyeshadow palette that is not just all full of shimmers. And also because their mattes are really nice. I love their matte formula. So let me know in the comments below if you picked any of these shadows up and what you think of them. I would love to hear your thoughts. And that's everything for this video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you next time.